The spilled coffee and the proposition, the espresso machine hissed like a vengeful spirit, a sound Alara Vance had come to know as the soundtrack of her life. She balanced 3 latte cups in one hand, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, trying to decipher the latest medical bill from Metropolitan General. Double quotes. Yes. I understand the payment plan, she said, her voice tight. It's just the amount. A sharp elbow jostled her from behind, and the world tilted into slow motion. The phone clattered to the floor. One of the lattes slipped from her grasp, its warm contents arcing through the air before splattering across the pristine, undoubtedly expensive white shirt of the man standing at the counter. Time snapped back into place. Alara's heart plummeted. Oh my God. I am so sorry. The man turned slowly. His eyes, a piercing shade of Arctic blue, narrowed slightly. He had the kind of jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, and his dark hair was impeccably styled despite the early hour. He looked like he'd stepped out of a financial magazine and into her disaster zone. It's fine, he said, his voice a low, controlled baritone that suggested it was very much not fine. No, it's not. She grabbed a fistful of napkins. From the counter, her hands trembling as she started dabbing at the dark stains spreading across his chest. This looks like it costs more than my rent. Please let me pay for the dry cleaning, or something. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. Stop. His touch sent an unexpected jolt through her. It's a shirt. It's replaceable. She looked up, truly meeting his gaze for the first time. There was an intensity there, a depth that was unsettling. He was studying her with an odd curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Most people in his world would have been furious, condescending. She was just apologetic. What's your name? He asked, releasing her wrist. Alara Vance. And you probably think I'm a complete catastrophe. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Julian Thorne. And I think you're refreshing. The name hit her like a physical blow. Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire, a phantom who built a global empire from nothing before he was 35. She had just baptized his probably custom shirt in oat milk. Oh God, she breathed, her cheeks flaming. You're that Julian Thorne? Guilty as charged, he said, the almost smile returning. Though I prefer to think of myself as just a man who should know better than to stand in the line of fire during the morning rush. 3 days later, the memory of those blue eyes was drowned out by the stark reality of a hospital waiting room. The bills were a mountain on her lap, the final number for her mother's experimental treatment circled in brutal red ink. $200,000. A sum as fictional as a lottery win to someone like her. She'd sold her prized art, supplies, picked up extra shifts, and the ring her grandmother left her was next. It wouldn't be enough. Her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. This is Julian Thorne. I have a business proposition that may interest you. Can we meet? She stared at the screen. How did he get this number? What could he possibly want? How did you get this number? I have resources. Are you free for dinner tonight? I'll send a car. Her instincts screamed danger. Desperation whispered opportunity. I can meet you somewhere public. Number car. Chez Laurent. 7 p.m. It's important. Laurent Chez Laurent was a universe away from Brew and Bean. Crystal chandeliers hushed conversations and menus without prices. She felt like a sparrow that had flown into a museum of rare jewels. He was already there, rising as she approached. He'd changed his shirt. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice softer than it had been in the cafe. He pulled out her chair. You look beautiful. She blushed, unused to such directness. Thank you. This place is incredible. We need privacy, he stated, signaling a waiter. Order anything you like. After they ordered, she clasped her hands on the table to stop them from shaking. You mentioned a business proposition. I can't imagine what I could possibly offer you. Julian leaned forward, his expression turning serious. I need a wife, Alara, for 6 months. She choked on her water. Excuse me, a contract marriage. Purely business. He explained quickly about the Yamamoto merger, their traditional values. His reputation as an uncommitted bachelor after two very public, failed engagements. I'm willing to pay $750,000 for 6 months of your time. The number sucked the air from the room. It was more than enough. It was freedom. It was her mother's life. Why me? She whispered. I did my research. You're honest. You need money. You're not part of my world, which makes you more believable, and you're real. He paused, his gaze intense. In my world, that's the rarest commodity of all. Her mind raced. Live in his penthouse. Play a part. And after 6 months, we divorce quietly. You sign an NDA. Keep the money. We go our separate ways. She thought of her mother's frail smile, her constant worry. She thought of a future that wasn't dictated by debt. I need to think, she said. Of course. But I need an answer soon. He handed her a crisp business card. My private number. The next day, after sitting by her mother's bedside and watching her sleep fitfully, Ilara made the call. I'll do it, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. But I have conditions. Half the money up front. I see my mother whenever I want, and it's all in a contract. Agreed. One more thing. Why me? The real truth this time. The line was silent for a long moment. You remind me of someone I used to be, he said, his voice quiet. Before the money complicated everything. Before I forgot how to be human. The next day, she stood in the marble lobby of Thorn Tower, a single suitcase at her feet. The private elevator opened directly into his penthouse. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the city, but the space felt cold, sterile, like a beautifully designed cage. Welcome, Julian said, emerging from a hallway. He looked more approachable in a simple sweater. Your room is this way? Her new bedroom was larger than her entire apartment. Her few clothes looked lost in the vast walk-in closet. There's one more thing, he said, producing a small velvet box. For public appearances, inside was a diamond ring, so brilliant it seemed to hold its own light. Her breath caught as he slid it onto her finger. The fit was perfect. It's too much, she whispered. It needs to be convincing, he said, but his voice was low, his fingers lingering on hers for a second too long. The Yamamoto executives will notice details. She looked from the sparkling jewel to his unreadable face, the weight of their agreement settling firmly on her hand and her heart. The performance had begun. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Stylists descended on the penthouse, transforming Ilara with whispered consultations and the rustle of expensive fabrics. She stood before a full-length mirror on the evening of the gala, barely. Recognizing the woman staring back, her auburn hair was swept into an elegant cascade of curls, her eyes accentuated by artful makeup. The emerald green gown she wore clung to her figure before pooling at her feet, making her feel like a stranger in her own skin. You look stunning. Julian's voice came from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching her. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and his lean frame. He was every inch the powerful billionaire. Yet his gaze held a warmth that hadn't been there before. I feel like an imposter, she admitted, smoothing the silk nervously. Like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life. You're perfect, he said, his voice low and sincere. He stepped into the room, the space between them suddenly charged. Just remember the story. We met at a charity auction for the city orchestra a year ago. It was a whirlwind romance. It's a small private ceremony 3 months ago. Got it, she said, her breath feeling a little short. And how? How are we together? How do we act? He moved closer until she could smell the clean, spicy scent of his cologne. Like we're in love, he said simply. His eyes held hers. Like we can't keep our hands off each other. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And how do we fake that? Instead of answering with words, he reached out. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The simple, intimate gesture sent a shiver straight down her spine. Like that, he murmured, his voice a soft rumble. Small touches, lingering glances, like we have secrets only the two of us share. The charity gala was a spectacle of wealth that made Chez Laurent look quaint. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel glittered with chandeliers and jewels. Ilara's nerves were a live wire, but Julian's hand remained as steady. Warm pressure on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. His touch felt both possessive and protective. Ah, Julian. And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Thorne. A distinguished older man with kind eyes and a warm smile approached them. Julian's hand pressed slightly more firmly against her back. Robert Tanaka, Julian said smoothly. A pleasure? Yes, this is my wife, Ilara, Mrs. Thorne Tanaka said, taking her offered hand. My father has spoken highly of your husband's proposals. It is a pleasure to finally put a face to the name, Mr. Tanaka Ilara said, her voice steadier than she felt. She offered a genuine smile. The pleasure is mine.
Oh.
Julian has told me so much about your family's commitment to sustainable architecture. The work you're doing with recycled materials is truly inspiring. Julian's gaze flickered to her, a flash of surprise and something akin to pride in his blue eyes. She'd spent the last 2 nights poring over articles about Tanaka Industries, determined not to be just a pretty accessory. You have excellent taste, Julian, Tanaka said with a hearty chuckle. Beauty and intelligence. A rare combination. Indeed, I'm the lucky one, Julian replied, his arm sliding around her waist to pull her closer to his side. The move felt natural, practiced, but the heat of his body through the layers of their clothing felt anything but fake. She keeps me grounded. As the evening wore on, Ilara found herself falling into the role with unexpected ease. Julian was an attentive partner, bringing her champagne, juicing her with evident pride, his fingers often brushing against her arm or back. When they danced, he held her close, his hand splayed against her back, his cheek near her temple. He whispered observations about the other guests, his dry wit making her laugh softly. You're a natural at this, he murmured into her ear as they swayed to the music. At what? Pretending to be someone I'm not? At being yourself, he corrected, pulling back to look at her. That's what makes this work, Ilara. You're not putting on an act. You're just being you in a very expensive dress. She looked up at him, the intensity in his gaze making her breath catch. Is that why you chose me? Because I'm authentic? His eyes dropped to her lips for a fleeting moment. Among other reasons, he said, his voice hushed. Later, back in the penthouse's stark silence, the facade crumbled. Ilara kicked off the torturous heels with a groan and collapsed onto the vast white sofa. Feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You were incredible tonight, Julian said, loosening his bow tie. The gesture was oddly intimate. Robert Tanaka was completely charmed. You sealed the deal. I liked him, she said honestly, accepting the glass of wine he offered her. He seems like a good man. He is. His family's entire philosophy is built on trust and legacy. They only partner with people they believe in. He sat beside her, closer than necessary, and took a sip of his own wine. The distance between them on the large sofa felt negligible. Can I ask you something? She ventured after a comfortable silence. Of course. Why is this merger so important to you? You're all ready. All of this. She gestured around the impossibly luxurious room. Julian was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass. My father built the first iteration of our company, he said finally, his voice losing its polished edge. He died when I was 25. I inherited the shell of it, along with a mountain of debt. For years, people said I was a trust fund kid riding on his coattails, that I'd run his legacy into the ground. He took a slow breath. This merger, it would make us the undisputed leader in green tech. It would prove that I didn't just preserve his legacy. I built my own, that I'm worthy of it. Without thinking, Ilara reached out and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Julian. What you've accomplished is remarkable. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something in his expression shifted, the carefully constructed walls crumbling to reveal a raw vulnerability. Shh. You don't know me, Ilara? Not really. Then tell me, she said softly, not removing her hand. We're going to be living together for 6 months. We might as well be friends. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I don't have friends. I have business associates and people who want something from me. What about me? What do I want from you? $750,000, he said, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. That's not all I want, she admitted, surprising herself with her own bravery. His blue eyes searched hers. What else? She looked at him, truly looked past the billionaire, the businessman, to the lonely man hiding underneath. Want to know the real Julian Thorne? The one who remembers what it's like to be human? Something in his gaze shattered. Before she could react, he leaned forward and captured her lips with his. It was nothing like the chaste, performative kisses they'd shared at the gala. This was desperate, hungry, and utterly real. It was a confession and a question. All at once, Elara's limited experience vanished in the wake of it. A fire ignited in her blood, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his perfectly styled hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing raggedly. Julian stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of desire. In sheer panic? That wasn't part of the contract, he said, his voice rough. No, she agreed, her lips still tingling from the pressure of his. It wasn't. This complicates things, does it? She asked, her heart pounding a wild rhythm against her ribs. Or does it just make them real? Julian stood abruptly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. You should get some rest. We have an early meeting with the investors tomorrow. He retreated to his wing of the penthouse, leaving her alone on the sofa. She touched her fingers to her swollen lips, the ghost of his kiss imprinted there. The crack in their arrangement had become a chasm, and she was no longer sure which side of it she was standing on. In his room, Julian stared at the ceiling, the taste of her still on his lips. He had crossed a line, and the terrifying part was, he had no desire to cross back. A tense silence had settled over the penthouse, thick and heavy as the morning fog outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 weeks had passed since the kiss, and an invisible wall had been rebuilt between them, higher and more fortified than before. In public, they were the picture-perfect couple, their touches and smiles perfectly choreographed. In private, they were ghosts haunting the same beautiful space. Speaking only of schedules and logistics, Eller had poured her confused energy into the art studio Julian had gifted her. The act of mixing paints and dragging brushes across canvas was the only thing that quieted the whirlwind in her mind. She was adding the final highlights to a seascape, losing herself in the blues and grays, when her phone rang. The caller-ID Metropolitan General sent an immediate chill down her spine. Miss Vance, this is Dr. Evans. The voice on the other end was professionally calm, but the tone was all wrong.
Oh, am I? Yeah.
I'm afraid your mother has taken a turn for the worse. Her fever spiked and her blood pressure dropped. We've moved her to the ICU. You should come immediately. The paintbrush slipped from her fingers, leaving a streak of cobalt blue across the pristine wooden floor. The world narrowed to the doctor's voice and the frantic beating of her own heart. She was barely aware of sinking into a chair, her hands trembling violently. Elara, Julian's voice came from the doorway. He'd been working from home, a rare occurrence. One look at her pale, stricken face, and his professional demeanor vanished. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her. What's wrong? It's my mom, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She's in the ICU. A sob broke free then, and she collapsed forward, without a moment's hesitation. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. He held her as she broke down, his hand stroking her back in slow, firm circles. It's all right. I'm here. We'll go right now. He didn't offer empty platitudes, just solid, unwavering support, but the meeting with the investors. She choked out against his shirt. The meeting can wait, he said, his voice firm. This is more important. He helped her to her feet, his arm a steady anchor around her shoulders. My driver is already downstairs. The hospital room was a stark, sterile world of beeping machines and hushed voices. Her mother, Emma, looked heartbreakingly small against the white sheets, her skin pale and translucent. But when she saw Alara, her eyes clouded with medication, managed to spark with a familiar light. "My beautiful girl," Emma whispered, her voice a dry rustle. She reached a frail hand toward Alara. "And you brought your husband," the words were a dagger wrapped in love. The lie of their marriage had never felt heavier, more cruel. Alara took her mother's hand, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Like I'm ready for my next great adventure," Emma said with a weak, brave smile. "But I worry about you, sweetheart. What will you do when I'm gone?" "Talk like that," Alara said, her voice thick with tears. "You're going to beat this?" Emma's gaze, still sharp despite her weakness, shifted to Julian, who had remained a respectful, silent presence near the door. "Come here, son." Julian approached the bed, his usual imposing stature softened by the circumstances. He looked strangely vulnerable. Emma reached for his hand with her free one, her grip surprisingly strong. "Take care of my daughter," she said, her eyes locking with his. "She's stronger than she knows, but she's never had someone to lean on. Promise me." Julian's throat worked. He looked from Emma's earnest face to Alara's tear-streaked one. The words that came out were not part of any contract. "I will," he promised, his voice thick with emotion that sounded terrifyingly real. "I love her very much." The words hung in the antiseptic air, and Alara's eyes snapped to his, met her gaze, and for a fleeting second, the walls were gone. She saw not calculation, but truth the following morning. Emotionally drained but comforted by her mother's stabilized condition, Alara was nursing a cup of tea in the penthouse kitchen when the private elevator chimed its arrival. Opened to reveal a woman who was everything Alara was not. Tall, willowy, with ice-blonde hair cut in a severe, expensive bob. She wore a tailored cream suit and moved with the predatory grace of someone who owned every room she entered. Well, the woman said, her voice a silky, British accented purr as her cold eyes swept over Alara's simple jeans and oversized sweater. "You must be the little temporary wife I've been hearing about." Julian emerged from his office, his expression hardening into a mask of cold anger. "Veronica, what are you doing here? You shouldn't have access. Aren't you going?" "To introduce me to your bride," Veronica asked, her smile as sharp as a scalpel. "Alara, this is Veronica Sterling," Julian said through gritted teeth. "My ex-fiancée Veronica, this is my wife Alara." Veronica's laugh was a short, harsh sound. "Wife? Oh, Julian, really? You can't expect anyone to believe this. Arrangement. It's painfully obvious. Another gold digger, just a less polished one than the last." Lara felt her face heat with a mixture of fury and shame. She was painfully aware of her messy bun and bare face. Veronica Julian's voice held a dangerous warning. "Leave. Now." "Not until I've said my piece," she replied, turning her venomous gaze back to Alara. "Did he tell you about our engagement? How I found him in his office with his assistant just weeks before our wedding?" Alara's stomach plummeted. She looked at Julian, searching for a denial, but found only a grim, pained tension in his jaw. "That's not what happened," he said, his voice low. "Isn't it?" Veronica's eyes glittered with malice. "You were so paranoid, so convinced. Everyone was after your money? You were right, of course. But at least I was honest about it. This little charade of yours." She waved a dismissive hand at Alara. "It won't last. When you get bored, you'll toss her aside like you did me. It's what you do." After she left, the penthouse felt colder, the silence oppressive. Alara stood by the windows, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Alara," Julian began, his voice weary. She held up a hand. "Is it true? About the other woman?" Was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the past pressing down on him. "Yes, but not the way she said. Veronica and I had an arrangement. A business merger disguised as a marriage, much like ours. I found out she was simultaneously seeing a rival CEO, selling him my company's secrets. The assistant was my lawyer, and we were drawing up papers to end it. And the pattern continues," Alara said, the bitterness leaching into her voice. "Another contract, another woman you're paying to pretend. That's not what this is," he said, frustration edging his tone. Not anymore, isn't it? She turned to face him, tears of betrayal welling in her eyes. In a few months, you'll pay me and I'll disappear, just like she said. What? Did you get a bulk discount on broken hearts? I do. You want me to say, he demanded, his own composure cracking, that this started as business and became something more? Because that's exactly what happened, and it terrifies me. Why? She shot back, the word a challenge. Why are you so afraid of letting someone love you? He stared at her, the fight draining out of him, leaving raw honesty in its wake. Because everyone leaves, Alara, he whispered, the words stripped bare. My mother died when I was a child. My father worked himself into an early grave. Every person I've ever let in has wanted something from me. My money, my status, my connections, never just me. I'm not them, she said, her voice soft but fierce. Aren't you? He asked, the vulnerability turning into a weapon. Aimed at himself. You took my money. You live in my home. You're playing the part I hired you to play. How am I supposed to know what's real anymore? He ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly lost. I don't know if what I feel for you is genuine, or just part of the beautiful, expensive fantasy I paid for. The silence that followed Julian's raw admission was heavier than any that had come before. It was the silence of a truth too painful to bear, hanging between them in the vast, cold space of the penthouse. Alara didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, retreating to the sanctuary of her art studio and closing the door softly behind her. She didn't paint. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, and replayed his words. How am I supposed to know what's real? Anymore? He was lost, adrift in a life he'd built on transactions, and her presence had only deepened the fog. The anger she'd felt at Veronica's visit melted away, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for the man behind the billionaire. That evening, she visited her mother. The hospital room was quiet, the only sound the soft beep of the heart monitor. Emma was awake, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, sweetheart, Emma said, her voice still weak, but lucid. Trouble in paradise? The irony of the question almost made Alara laugh. Instead, she found the words spilling out the entire messy truth. The contract, the money, the growing, terrifyingly real feelings for Julian, and his devastating confession of fear and doubt. She held nothing back. Emma listened, her wise eyes never leaving her daughter's face. When Alara finished, emotionally, spent, her mother gave her hand a feeble squeeze. Double quotes. Oh, honey, she whispered.
Oh.
You've fallen in love with a man who's forgotten how to believe in it. What do I do? Alara asked, her voice breaking. How can I prove it to him when he thinks everything is part of a deal? You can't prove love with words, Alara, Emma said, her tone gentle but firm. It's not a business negotiation. Love is a choice. It's something you demonstrate. Every day you choose to love someone despite their flaws, their fears, their past. The question isn't how to prove it to him. The question is, do you choose him? Does your heart, knowing all of it, still choose him? Alara didn't need to think. She saw the man who dropped everything to drive her to the hospital. The man who secretly built her an art studio. The man who, behind walls of fear and wealth, had kissed her with a desperation that felt more real than anything in her life. Yes, she whispered, the certainty solidifying in her soul. I choose him. Emma smiled, a peaceful, knowing expression smoothing the lines of pain on her face.
Oh.
Then show him that love doesn't come with conditions or expiration dates. Show him that some things in life are priceless. They just require the courage to accept them. The next morning, Alara woke with a new resolve. Julian had already left a note on the kitchen counter stating he had back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be home until late. She used the time. She visited her mother again, the air between them now clear and hopeful. Then she went to the market, gathering ingredients with a focused purpose. The world had shifted on its axis. Penthouse. Once a beautiful cage of polished surfaces and unspoken rules, now felt like a different space entirely. The air was lighter, charged with a new, vulnerable energy. They had stayed up most of The night, talking on the sofa, their hands intertwined, they spoke of childhood dreams, of fears, of the small, insignificant details that build a life. The pretense was gone, burned away by the raw honesty of their confessions. The next morning, Julian did not leave for the office. Instead, he led Alara into his sleek, minimalist study. Without a word, he went to a locked drawer in his desk, retrieved a thick legal document, and placed it on the polished surface between them. The words matrimonial contract stood out in stark, formal type. He looked at her, his blue eyes clear and certain. "This was our beginning," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But it's not our future." In one swift, decisive motion, he picked up the contract and tore it in half. Then he tore it again, letting the pieces flutter into the wastebasket beside his desk. The sound of tearing paper was the most liberating either of them had ever heard. It was the sound of a wall crumbling, of a transaction ending, of a life beginning. "No more pretending," he said, coming around the desk to take her hands in his. "No more conditions. Just us. Whatever that looks like." Alara felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. She threw her arms around his neck, laughing as he spun her gently in the middle of the room. The formality of the study seemed to laugh. With them, later that day, they had their scheduled meeting with Mr. Tanaka. The atmosphere was different. Where before Julian had been the picture of polished control, he was now more relaxed, more open. He spoke less about profit margins and more about shared vision. He never once let go of Alara's hand. As the meeting drew to a close, Mr. Tanaka smiled, his wise eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked at their joined hands resting on the table. "Julian," he said, his tone shifting from business to personal. "When we first met, I saw a brilliant man, driven by the ghost of his father. A man I could do business with." His gaze softened, as it moved to Alara, "But now I see a man who is whole, a man who has found his center. My father always said the strongest partnerships are built not just on good business, but on strong foundations. You have built a beautiful foundation." He stood and bowed slightly to them both. "You have our blessing, not just for the merger, but for your life together. It will be an honor to work with you both." The drive home was silent, but it was a silence, filled with shared wonder. They had gotten everything they had originally sought: the money for Alara, the merger for Julian, but it all felt insignificant compared to what they had found in each other. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Julian led Alara out onto the penthouse's sprawling terrace. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below them, a galaxy of man-made stars. "This all started with a business arrangement," he said, turning to face her, his expression serious and tender. "A temporary solution. But you were the permanent answer I never knew I was looking for." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, familiar velvet box. Alara's breath caught. It was the ring he had given her, the symbol of their contract. "This was part of the deal," he said, opening the box. The diamond caught the last of the sunset's light, blazing with fire. "But my feelings for you are not." He took the ring out and dropped the empty box onto a nearby table. He took her left hand in his. "Alara Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't want a temporary wife. I want a real partner. I want early morning coffee and late night conversations. I want to build a life, not a business deal. I love you. Hey, will you marry me for real this time? Forever?" Tears of pure happiness streamed down Alara's face. She wasn't being hired. She wasn't being paid. She was being chosen, just as she had chosen him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger once more, but this time its meaning was utterly transformed. It was no longer a prop, it was a promise. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of sunset and new beginnings, as they held each other under the vast, darkening sky. The city humming its endless song below, they both knew. The billionaire had found his heart. The struggling artist had found her home, her contract had ended, but their real story, the one written not in ink, but in the language of the heart, was just beginning.